Legend of Total War here, and today we're doing another Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires campaign review, this time revisiting Katarin's campaign. So patch 6.1 dropped a couple of days ago, and I've had some time to really focus in and try out Katarin's campaign. I haven't tried out any of the others. I really just wanted to focus on Katarin's campaign, because she was previously the one I primarily played. But I imagine that the Kislev rework hits the other legendary lords a bit differently than it does with Katarin. But in this video here, I'm just going to focus on overviewing the Kislev rework and how it impacts Katarin's campaign compared to the supporter race that she had before. But I will acknowledge that this will be different for different factions for sure. Okay, so first thing in terms of like reviewing the rework, because it touches a whole bunch of different areas with the Kislevite faction, what I'm going to do is focus on the things that they did the best first, and then progress towards the things that I think deserve a little bit of criticism, where it's maybe a little bit unpolished towards the later stage of it. Okay, so in terms of the rework, I think the best element of it was the Ataman rework. This is almost like a 10 out of 10 aspect of this rework, what they've done. So previously, Atamans were a pretty light touch. You gained one Ataman every 2 provinces that you fully controlled. You had to own all the regions in the province. You would assign an Ataman, and it was to a province, and it would basically act like a governor from like Total War Attila or whatever, where it would provide a small number of buffs, and as they continued to stay there, they would gain more buffs over time. And you can move them to a different province if you feel like you needed to get their advantage to help the province thrive, or to stop a rebellion or whatever. But now what happens is you assign it to a province, and it actually feels like a proper character, where you can level them up, you can give them equipment, you can give them followers, and it will affect the region they're in. So for example, you can give them tax collectors, you can give them vodka distillers or whatever, which will increase their public order in the area. And the skill tree that they have, which will be unique to them, and you cannot recruit these guys as a boyar, whereas previously you could, which wasn't really worth doing. You'd only ever really do that by accident, I think, because they weren't good boyars. But yeah, the skill tree that they've got now is hugely impactful. So it's very valuable to hold on to your high-level Atamans, and there's quite a lot of things that you can do to sort of increase the rate of experience that the Atamans actually gain. So, for example, in the major Kislevite settlements, you can build this building here, Ataman's Estate. So this can't be built in any other of the settlements, this from what I've seen. And it can provide experience per turn plus 800 for Atamans deployed in this province, in addition to all the other things that you can do to increase their experience. This will also provide them with a unique trait that they gain. So you can use basically Kislev to or a different province, either Prague or Erengrad, to train up your Atamans, train them there. When they get that trait, or when you feel like they're sufficiently leveled up, you can move them on to a different province and then assign another Ataman back over here to basically get trained up. If you want to do that, you absolutely don't need to, but the downside here is that it'll strip away all the income from that particular province. And because the 3 major Kislevite cities, they tend to make a lot of money, you have to decide whether or not that's actually worth it. You can always just demolish the building later down the track once you finish training up enough Atamans, but it's entirely up to you. But overall, it gives you loads of different options on how you want to play the campaign using the Atamans. And I do find that all throughout the campaign, I'm constantly checking out my Atamans. One thing to note, though, is that the game doesn't give you like a notification letting you know that your Atamans could be leveled up, so you kind of need to check them yourself manually every turn. They will show up in your Lords and Hero list. But yeah, there's also like tradable resources. Any tradable resource will provide an experience bonus for Atamans deployed in this province, who absolutely do not need to build that Ataman's Estate. It's just entirely up to you. So really good system here. Oh yeah, and on top of that, the Atamans, when assigned to a province, will allow them to use the garrisons in any of the regions of the province. So for example, if we put him in Fort Jakova, obviously we don't own it right now, but if we had one in Fort Jakova, we had the whole province, you could use your garrison at Vitevo to sally out an attack. Initially, it's a pretty small area of influence from which they're able to reach the opponent, but you can actually increase their range as your Ataman gains more experience. Really amazing system. I really like it. I actually hope they implement that system into many of the other factions, because so many times I've seen just like piddly little raiding armies come through, and your garrisons just sit there staring at them, and you know that they could win, but they're just sitting there raiding you, annoying you, taking all your money, sort of thing. And this is a really good system for dealing with that. So really great system there with the Atamans. So next thing I want to talk about is the court and orthodoxy. So this system here is maybe a little bit complex in how it functions, but overall it's actually pretty simple in its impact. This is basically just another tech tree. The only thing that really requires some degree of paying attention to it is making sure that these two numbers here remain as close to each other as possible. You don't want this to be at 10 and this be at 0 or vice versa, because the further distorted these two are, the more severe a global penalty will be applied. So, for example, with Katarin's campaign, you're using her faction trait here, so allowed +1 graded tier difference in the support for the Ice Court before penalties are applied. What that means is that we can be at 1 and this can remain at 0 and no penalties can be applied. Katarin's also got a skill in her skill tree, Khan Queen over here, that will allow it to get an additional one. So that means if you've got that, it'll give you Ice Court tier advantage of 2. So that means this can be at 2, and this could be at 0, and they'll be fine. Or this could be at 4, and this could be at 2, no penalties are applied. But if this was at 5, and this was at 2, you've then a 3-tier advantage, you would get a small penalty. But if it was really quite pronounced, the difference, the penalties become quite severe. So it's really important to pay attention to that. There's various different things you can do to gain influence of it. So basically, there's 100 points per tier. Once you gain 100 points, you gain a token, and then it sets you back down to 0, and then you build up 100 again. There's a lot of things that you can do passively and actively. The active ones are usually just fight battles. So for the Ice Court, the battles fought against Chaos, each battle fought will provide 10 support for that faction, regardless of the size of the battle. So anytime we fight either like 1 unit, that's 10 points. Or if it's like 3 full stacks in one battle, it's also 10 points. So basically, if you really want to rack this up, try to queue up as many small battles as possible. That's if you want to cheese it that way. Now, as for the Great Orthodoxy, at least if you're playing as the Ice Court, the way to get battles against Orthodoxy enemies is pretty simply fight whoever Castalton is at war with. So you're actually heavily incentivized to get a military alliance with Castalton, and if you're going to go and fight someone, drag him into it so that you'll gain points against the Orthodoxy's enemies, assuming that you want to keep things balanced. Like if you're looking to gain the advantage because this got too far ahead, well, obviously don't drag Castalton in. So you're actually heavily incentivized to not confederate Castalton, because as soon as you confederate him, well, then you're not going to get any points against Orthodoxy's enemies, or if he gets wiped out, which is actually very likely to happen if you don't pay attention to it. And then there's various things you can do to just gain points passively. So mostly in your structures, but also in your Atamans. Your Atamans, when they get to level 5, you can choose them to either be supporting the Ice Court or the Orthodoxy. It's mutually exclusive. So if we have a look at these buildings over here, so they can provide increasing support for one faction or another. They're mutually exclusive, so if you build down the Ice Court support, you can't build the Orthodoxy Shrine. And so try to balance that out across your various different regions. In the early stages of the campaign, I find that these bars progress very slowly. In the later stages of the campaign, basically you get to a point where you could essentially gain a tier a turn. And it can progress extremely quickly. Now, once you hit 50 points, which I haven't yet gotten to that point, but that's the maximum tokens that you can possibly spend on all of these techs here. There's basically no point getting above 50. So once you're got all those points, basically those buildings just demolish them all because you just don't need them anymore, essentially. I would assume, again, it would take a little while to get to that point. But what I do find is that this system doesn't really kick off that much in the early stages of the campaign. And I feel like, for the most part, that's when you really need it the most. Kislev has their hardest time at the very earliest stages, and you might be lucky if you can choose one of these. And that's largely thanks to a dilemma that will happen early on in the campaign, where you get to just choose either 2 points for the Ice Court, 2 points for the Great Orthodoxy, or 1 point for each, allowing you to spend these points. So there are quite a few things to research here. I think there's 40 in total, but yeah, 50 points in total to spend, because there's 2 for the first tier, then 3 for the second. These over here on this side will be for the Ice Court, these ones for the Orthodoxy, and there's 5 different categories. And some of these bonuses are extremely impactful. So let me just see here, I think it's Hierarchy. This one here in particular, all lords gain access to Zealous Conscription, enabling access to instantly recruitable Kossars. This is probably the best one in the entire thing, because this allows you to basically just pump an entire full stack full of Kossars instantly, so to handle an emergency situation. And because you can globally reduce the recruit time, No, sorry, not recruit time. Recruit cost. Well, I guess it is also reducing the recruit time just down to 0. You can essentially eventually recruit these units absolutely for free. So really good for emergency situations, which Kislev has in their campaign happen all the damn time. So that one's super impactful, just as an example. So there's some really, really good stuff in here. So very powerful mechanics, but most of this will happen in the later stages of the campaign. You're very unlikely to get 5 points in total before like turn 30. Even if you entirely focus on it, it's insanely unlikely. But overall, pretty good system. I think it could just use a bit of a tweak so that in the earlier stages of the campaign, maybe provide the player with a few more options to get some more boons earlier on, just because it just ends up you're unable to really progress it that quickly, because you can only fight so many battles per turn, and you can only have so many settlements at the early stage of the campaign providing you with benefits, and then it just snowballs out of control later in the stage, because it doesn't increase the maximum amount that you need. It's always just 100, and so it just keeps getting faster and faster, which then could cause the problem of things getting out of whack really quickly. So you really need to pay attention to it in later stages of the campaign. But overall, I do really like the system. Okay, then let's go over the tech tree. This is overall, I think, a positive buff for Kislev, but it's not a positive in every single area. There are some ways in which there's like stronger buffs, and there's some areas in where the buffs are, well, not quite as good or removed entirely. So for example, Kislev used to have a range buff that just applied to every single unit that had range, and now it's entirely focused on the like Kislevite pistol units. So essentially the regular Kossars and your Ice Guard have been nerfed a little bit in terms of their range. Not that big of a deal, but it's just one area where they're just gone. Another thing is that it's pretty lopsided in terms of the quality of some of these technologies. Again, not that big of a deal. This is pretty standard for Total War games in general, just all the tech trees across Total War games. So if we have a look at here, for example, Siege Mentality, +4 melee defense when under siege, which will probably happen quite a lot. Ammunition plus 15%. That's not when under siege. That's just 15% extra ammunition for all units across all armies and garrisons, right? That's really good. So that's a really high value technology. But then if we go down over here to Dwarven Anvils, so in order to start researching this one, you have to research these 3 here as well. So it requires a fair bit to get to that point. And what does it provide? +10 armor for Kislev melee cavalry unit. Now, here's the thing. That is actually pretty much no impact whatsoever, because armor is not really that big of, like, it's not that impactful of a stat for these units in the first place, because most of them already have above 100 armor. Due to the way that the armor calculation works, every point over 100 armor actually becomes less valuable than the point before it. It's a bit weird. And I don't know, I'll have to make a separate video explaining how the armor works. But basically, this technology is complete shit. It's very low impact. It probably won't be the difference between victory and defeat, or even one of these guys living or dying in most situations. 10 armor is not a hell of a lot, whereas 15% ammunition is fucking huge by comparison. So considering they both take the same amount of time, but this is like considered like the pinnacle of that section of technology, it's a bit backwards. And there's quite a lot of that kind of stuff in there where, you know, if we go over here, for example, Convalescence, casualty replenishment rate +3%, growth +10. All armies, all garrisons, that's what it applies to. But then the one underneath it, only growth in frozen climates and casualty replenishment in 2%. So that is nowhere near as good as the previous one. The thing is, both of those technologies were in the previous tech tree as well. It's just a bit weird to have it sort of functioning that way, where there's like weaker technologies later on in the tech tree. I just find that a little bit weird. Overall, it's not like the greatest tech rework ever. It's probably better than the Greenskin rework, which I think was crap. But it's not as good as, for example, the Corn technology update or the Dwarfen one. I think that one was significantly enhanced. But overall, it's fine, basically. It's just a whatever. The other tech tree, I think, was fine. At least, I mean, they had already removed the requirement from having to own particular settlements to get the tech tree. So the Kislevite tech tree has gone through various different stages. Overall, this one's fine. It's not an issue. I just think that some of the techs are a bit low impact, and other ones are quite high impact. Okay, then the next thing I want to talk about is the Ice Court. So the way it previously worked is pretty much the same as how it currently works. What they've done is basically no impact really. So you spend some money, you put them into the training slot. We start off with a Frost Maiden hero slot. I don't think the other ones do. And then eventually you research access to these other slots as well. And then it is progressed faster than it was previously. I think previously, at least for Katarin, it took 6 turns to train one of them. And now it's 5. I think it's 5 across all of them to train it, and there's a fair bit that you can do to actually reduce the cost of the training of it, so you can eventually get this essentially free, but I'd imagine by the time that it's free, it wouldn't actually matter about how much it actually costs. They're still really good heroes, don't get me wrong, but my problem here is that it's actually quite bland. So you choose the hero, select it, so on the next turn, you'll be able to choose its Law of Magic, so either Ice or Tempest, and then the subsequent 3 turns, there will be 3 dilemmas with 4 options each as for the 3 different traits that they're going to get. And the options will be the same every single time, which means it usually leads to basically the same hero being created every single time with the exact same traits, because with the 4 different options, there's no variation. There are only 12 possible options, and you will always be offered the same 12 options, and it's the same thing whether it's a maiden hero or a witch lord. They're both given the exact same traits, and some of those traits are just obviously better than the other ones on offer, so it's not really a difficult choice. I think that they really need to add a lot more options, and maybe actually return to the randomization to some of these options, or maybe even if the first choice that you make impacts on what options are available for you on the second choice and the third choice, that would be a lot more interesting. But yeah, it's just a 3-course meal essentially, and you could just choose the same 3 courses every single time, and it's fine. The hero that you get will be very powerful. The traits are really good. It's just a bit boring, that's all. So overall, I think the Ice Court mechanic is basically of the same amount of value that it was before, because the previous system had really great traits in it as well. It's just that it was a bit more interesting because there was more randomization to it. I would be heavily incentivized in saving my characters that actually got like all 3 of the really good traits that I wanted, because it was so rare to actually do that. But now I just pump out the same fucking trait over and over again. So all of my Frost Maidens they're just exactly the same as each other. But that's I guess a downside to that one. Not a huge criticism, I just think that it's just boring, basically. Then if we come over to here, we've got the devotion change. Now, I'd say that this one here is probably the least balanced, the one that they really didn't check very much at all. Because this is heavily... The amount that you're going to interact with this depends on what difficulty that you're playing on. If you're playing on lower campaign difficulties, you will interact with the devotion mechanic a hell of a lot more than if you're playing on, say, legendary difficulty. And that's because on different difficulties, you will be provided with a different difficulty penalty, essentially. So on normal difficulty, there's no difficulty penalty to it. So it's just you would just see collected income -4 and that's it. But on legendary... you've got that -8. Now, I understand that most people don't play on legendary difficulty, so I don't think it's going to impact that many people's campaigns. But for those of us that do play on legendary difficulty, basically we're just hardly ever interacting with this mechanic, because in order to do an invocation of any type, you need to get to at least 50 devotion. And on legendary difficulty, it's just not practical to even attempt to do that, especially in the early stages of the campaign. Because here's the thing, Katarin used to have a +6 bonus to public order in her faction trait there, right? Which made maintaining public order really easy for her. That's gone now. It's still not that difficult to just ensure no revolts happen, but the difference between not having a revolt occur and having an invocation happen is pretty damn significant, especially because the closer that you get to 50, you'll also have debuffs that'll try to push you more towards the center. You no longer have the supporter race as well. Now, the supporter race had huge public order bonuses in there as well. So when you had completed, it was like a +6 bonus as well. And there's various other global bonuses as well that you can gain from public order. So it was very easy prior to patch 6.1 to play as Katarin and easily be, even on legendary difficulty, be at 100% public order in all provinces. But after patch 6.1, it's not really practical at all to do it. Well, you can do it. it's just not practical because the amount of effort required to do it makes the rewards not really worth going for. Like these are good rewards, but let's put it in perspective of what we would have to do in order to get any of them. So in order for Kislev city, in order for this city here to have a positive plus 50 devotion, you would have to have an Ataman in there that's fairly leveled up, and they're early in their blue line. Their skill will get them plus 4 towards what's it called? Plus 4 to devotion. So that doesn't even get rid of the difficulty penalty. You would also have to have this purge the steps. So that then gets rid of the difficulty penalty. So then you'd have to turn off the taxes, and then you've got it completely at 0 there. Okay, at that point, then you've got various other global bonuses. So there's I think there's 2 extra devotion global bonuses within this mechanic here. So that's 2. Then there's some additional tech in here. I think this one here will provide you with an additional 2. You've got various equipment that you can do. So she used to get, I think, a global bonus to public order here. But if you've got both of her equipment, you can get a global bonus to devotion, right? Now, all of the things that I've just mentioned, that won't be enough to get you to plus 50, even if you've got all of that, right? So then you've got various things that you can build. So if you then have to build these structures here in order to get a small amount of devotion. Now, at that point, you probably would start to gravitate towards 50 after all of that amount of effort. But the amount of time that it takes to get from, you would probably be close to here all the way back up to here. It would take many, many turns because it doesn't just instantly get over there. So the amount of times that you would actually activate this mechanic on legendary difficulty is incredibly infrequent. You know, unless you're garrisoning a full stack sitting in here, so because that will provide you with plus 20 public order. The thing is that you would have to pay probably a minimum of like 2,000 or 3,000 gold at a minimum to maintain that. It's just not feasible to do that given the rewards there, because they're not permanent. They are significant for sure, but you can only do them once every 5 turns. So I think that, again, if you're playing on normal difficulty, you're probably not noticing this problem at all. But if you're playing on hard difficulty or very hard, you might start to notice it. And if you're playing on legendary difficulty, you really, really fucking notice it. Because in the campaigns that I've played, guess what? I haven't used this mechanic once. Because I can't. I'm not going to garrison my armies inside my settlements for several turns. You just can't do that. There are too many enemies to deal with. So yeah, in an entire campaign, I haven't had plus 50 public order at any stage of that particular campaign. So it's heavily imbalanced. So basically, it's just a mechanic that I just don't ever use because I can't use it. It's just not feasible to do that. And I'm actively going towards all the global bonuses to public order. I've researched the tech one. I've got all of the global bonuses through here. There's also another global bonus through here somewhere. I think it's this one. Yeah, devotion plus 1, but I have to get to tier 5 to get to that point. It takes a little while to get that way. And the thing is, once you get all of that stuff, you don't really need these bonuses anyway. So it really could use another pass. I really don't think that they check this on legendary difficulty whatsoever, because yeah, you basically just don't ever get to use it, which is a shame because I would like to on my legendary difficulties campaign actually use an invocation on some of these armies. But yeah, you've got to spend 50 devotion to do it, and it's just not practical to get it to 50 because your armies are just always, they have to be fighting all the various enemies. But overall, I think the Kislev rework is really good. If I was to give it a rating out of 10, I'd give it, I think, a 7 out of 10. It's not a perfect rework. It definitely could use a bit of tweaking, especially with the imbalance to some of these systems. But the thing is, it's largely in comparison to her previous mechanic, which I didn't dislike. I thought it was fine. I think this is slightly better than the old system, for sure. There's some areas where it is vastly better, like with the Atamans, and I do think this is definitely a better system. But I think the devotion system, this is a downgrade on what they had previously. The previous system, if you were playing on, regardless of whatever difficulty you're playing on, you'd be able to do invocations. You had one you could do on turn 1. But yeah, you could get through 50 turns on legendary difficulty, and you just be like, it's just not practical for me to ever press these buttons because you just can't. Even with all the falls, because most of the things are just like +1 here and +1 there, and you've got to overcome something like 24 public order. So let's just say there was no other issues, right? So you don't have any problems from public order from this as well. You've got 8 that you've got to overcome, then 12. And then you've also got to overcome, and then 6. So 18 you've got to overcome. just to get it to 50, essentially. And that's to slowly progress it 1 per turn to 50. So yeah, it can be a bit of a pain. Also, if you declare war on any Kislevite faction, you instantly drop down by 10 devotion all your provinces. So again, you just don't really get a chance to use it. But overall, I think it's a good mechanic, and I like it. It could just use a bit of a tweaking. Again, if you're playing on normal difficulty or easy difficulty, you're not going to notice this issue whatsoever. But I really don't think that legendary difficulty should make the game less fun. I've oftentimes said things like the difficulty slider is oftentimes a fun slider. You shouldn't lock out core campaign mechanics just because difficulty level just basically disables it for you. I just find that makes the campaign more boring. So I think that Kislev is better played now on lower difficulties than legendary difficulty, just because you'll be able to interact with more of the mechanics than you will if you're playing on higher difficulties, which is unfortunate, because there are some other factions, such as Khorne, for example, where their mechanics are actually enhanced by higher difficulty. You know, using them as a core example, because you want to be fighting as many battles as possible. On legendary difficulty, the AI will field more armies, so you get to interact with your mechanics way more often on legendary difficulty. So this is like the polar opposite. There's nothing wrong with that, I'm just pointing it out, that's all. Okay, now, as for Katarin's campaign, having played through extensive campaigns of it previously and played through it now with this one, I could say that it is probably more difficult now than it ever has been, because this mechanic doesn't really kick off in the early stages of the campaign, and there are more enemies that are seemingly more competent now than they ever were before. And this is also a campaign where it feels like there is like an objectively correct path to take, rather than just letting the player sort of figure it out themselves. So, for example, if you don't go after Throt the Unclean, basically you can expect that Castalton will get wiped out. That will just absolutely happen. I do find that Castalton, even if he gets the upper hand against Throt at some point, he never pushes his advantage and tries to take Hell Pit. And when he just sits there, eventually Azazel jumps in, and basically they both just roll right over him. So it's basically heavily incentivized for you to take out Throt straight away, because you really don't want Castalton to get wiped out. So that's basically leaning you towards a linear campaign in that regard. Because if you do anything else, like go and fight Draika, or go and fight Azag over here, well then expect that to just fall to pieces. You absolutely can save, what's his name, Castalton, but yeah, you really need to go after Throt, and then by extension go after Azazel. It's quite a challenging campaign, even in the beginning stages of it, because you start off with a pretty small army, and the guys over here, they've got a pretty hefty army at the very beginning, and oftentimes they will sit inside of this city early on, and they'll basically outnumber you, and you want to be able to advance as quickly as possible, because you've got to get over there and deal with Throt super early. So you really need to like rush your recruitment, not just recruit in this province here, but also recruit in Kislev in order to advance on them quickly enough so that you can get over there. Overall, I think it's a very challenging campaign, but it's fun. I do enjoy a Katarin campaign for sure, but I don't think that the Kislev rework has overall enhanced her campaign at the beginning of it, but it definitely enhances it in the later stages of the campaign. And I really feel like for Katarin, she needed more tools to work with at the beginning of her campaign, because I think that's where most people are going to struggle like the most, because you don't get much tools to work with. Like, their economy hasn't been buffed. Most of their early game units are complete trash. Like, none of this has really changed in terms of where their units are. So let me just briefly talk about her units. So it's still just heavily incentivized that you recruit just Kossars and Kislevite warriors, because these units here, recruiting the barracks, you've only got limited build slots, and you've got so many different economic buildings, and now there's even more incentive than ever to not build military buildings, because you want to be utilizing this mechanic over here, because these units are side grades to Kossars. They're just not worth it. Like, the stats might increase, but it also increases relative to their upkeep cost, and you're just not going to be swimming around in cash. And only until sort of tier 4 do you really start to see substantially tactically better units, such as like Little Groms, their only artillery piece, really helping you out with sieges, and things like Sleds, which is at tier 3. But getting things like Ice Guard, it's still locked at like tier 4. Even with the Boca Palace, you still got to get to tier 4 to get the Ice Guard. Getting Tsar Guard over here, not a huge priority, I think, just because budgetary reasons will be a little bit of an issue. So yeah, challenging campaign that I just think that this rework really didn't do much to enhance the early stages of the campaign for Katarin. But overall, I still really enjoy this campaign. I can't say it's my favorite of the Kislevite campaigns because I haven't played the other ones, but I still do really enjoy it. It's more challenging, I think, largely due to the addition to certain legendary lords in the area as the game has progressed. So previously, when Immortal Empires first came out, Astrogoth wasn't over here. And, well, now there's Astrogoth, and there's Arbal the Undefeated. Arbal the Undefeated is probably the main contender. Arbal pretty much always makes his way over here, and he can be a massive threat, especially if you're doing something else at the meantime. So, highly incentivize that you be as aggressive as possible in this campaign. Take these guys out as quickly as possible, and just fucking move on as quickly as you bloody well can. And get over to Throt, and take him out immediately. I get there would be some incentive to try to use him as like a trait farm, because his defeat trait is quite good. My recommendation is if you want to do that, kill him first and then just revive him later and do it when everything's stabilized. Because the thing is with Kislev, its campaign, basically all the difficulty is completely concentrated at the start of the campaign, and then once you get to like turn 30 or 40, or more like when you get to having secured the entirety of Kislev, the difficulty drops off a fucking cliff, and it becomes so damn easy that you're just basically like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to win this, I'm going to win this, I'm going to win this, you know, because their economy just absolutely snowballs later on in the campaign. But early on, you just feel ridiculously poor and under stress at the beginning, which is good. I think that's what a lot of people want out of a campaign. It's just that it doesn't really last very long and then just absolutely falls off a cliff. But I think that's an issue that a lot of factions do have, so I'm not holding it as a major blight for Katarin's campaign. Overall, I would rank this campaign in terms of overall and how it's designed, probably like an 8 out of 10, because it offers a really unique experience for a lot of players, and I really do enjoy this campaign, but there are, I think, a lot of issues. I would like to see this campaign be more challenging all throughout, and I would like maybe the beginning to have a bit more tools to work with, even if that means at the cost of later game tools. It's too late game heavy in terms of all the good stuff for Kislev, and it kind of sucks that you're really restricted in the early stage of the campaign, especially with their unit roster. So one thing that I noticed as well, as specific to Prague, is their the base settlement building at Prague actually allows you to recruit these units here, the Kosovo dervishes. So here's an interesting thing. When I captured this settlement here, because it was like occupied by Arbal, I took it off him, I was then able to recruit the Kosovo dervishes without requiring military building. Guess what? I actually recruited them, and I'm glad that I did. So having more units available at tier 0, for a legendary difficulty player, I actually recruited a trash tier cavalry unit, and it was really useful. And so doing a bit more of that kind of stuff, having some certain settlements at like tier 0, having more tactical use, having basically a localized recruitment for some of these things rather than locked under specific buildings that provide no economic advantage, that's going to be really valuable. Especially when you've got a faction that just has like 10 different economic buildings, like, oh, we got a trade resource we got to build, then we've got to build this one, and then we're going to build this one, then we've got to build this one, then we've got to build this one as well. And so you basically you don't start building military buildings until it starts reaching like tier 3 and 4. Again, this is a legendary difficulty problem. Most people are not going to encounter this issue. But yeah, if you're playing legendary difficulty and don't do this stuff, basically expect to suffer major setbacks. That's all I'm saying on that. Unless you're either really exploiting the game, or you are absolutely exceptional, and it's like the only campaign you play, and you can just predict every step that the AI is going to take, which, if this is your first time playing it, that's not going to happen. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Overall, I really enjoy Katarin's campaign. It's not perfect. I think there's a lot of things that could use tweaking to it, but if you want to check out a Kislevite campaign, I would recommend a Katarin campaign on normal difficulty. Don't play on legendary difficulty for your first one. You will probably not enjoy it, because it'll be incredibly frustrating having a pretty important mechanic just being locked out for the majority of the campaign. Anyway, appreciate you guys. That'll be the end of this one, and we'll see you next time. Later, guys.